Okay, the next section of the show is called Significant Accomplishments. When I asked the friends that you saw before in the previous section what they believed your most significant accomplishments were, each replied first and foremost about your family. Having raised your two wonderful children who are extensions of you, much of the time as a single parent, and your continued devotion to your family and its togetherness. And of course, they mentioned your significant successes as a committed educator, scholar, and leader in the profession. Lee Shulman said, "It is so hard to isolate one or two significant accomplishments within a long career of such remarkable distinction." Ursula most admires your ability to move from the depths of journal-driven academia, where you earned your stripes at Stanford, to your current role as a public intellectual, where you apply your well-honed skills to issues of high relevance to the field. Jean replied, "Who's to say that your most significant professional accomplishments are not still ahead for you?"
Yes.
Sure, we're putting you out to pasture. But Ben Franklin helped to write the Declaration of Independence at age 70. Grandma Moses didn't start to paint until she was 78. Frank Lloyd Wright created the Guggenheim when he was 80, and Picasso was still working hard at 91. But to highlight a few of your significant accomplishments to the field of education and educational research, I'd like to ask you some questions. Why were your early studies with the Far West Lab, now known as West Ed, so important?
Some of them were teacher training studies that showed that you could really improve teachers' classroom behavior. And you could do it, we were using micro-teaching techniques, and we could train teachers. We could get them to ask questions that are higher order. We could get them to manage classrooms different. We could teach them that in a week or two or three, and we were able to show long-term effects a year later, that their behavior not only changed, but stayed changed in ways that we all thought were positive. So it was the application of both behaviorism and new technology and good research in the sense of long-term follow-up research and training studies that showed you could probably do some interesting things in improving teaching. But as I was doing those teacher training materials, I also bid on a contract that became pretty well known in the country, at least at that time. And it was called the Beginning Teacher Evaluation Study, but by the time I got the money to do it, we had very few beginning teachers in the state of California. They were going through a recession and firing teachers. So I reconfigured the study to look at teacher allocations of time in classrooms. How do teachers spend their time? We didn't have good records of what teachers do in classrooms. This was well before the qualitative research movement, which gave us documentaries of what teachers really do. And I was convinced there was something in the resources issue that needed to be studied. So anyway, I ended up with about $5 million over 4 years, which in 1970 something would have been like 20 million, 30 million today. A big staff, doing field work, 2nd and 5th grade work, essentially on how teachers spend their time. And we identified teachers also who were better teachers and less better teachers. We don't want to say bad, it's not right, but they were bad. And we looked at how they did things in their classrooms, and we coded all sorts of things. But the study was significant because it was the first time we could show huge differences, I think, between teachers who might be teaching right next door to each other in how much time they allocate for reading or for mathematics. In mathematics, they might spend time on drill computation or problem-solving word problems, or they might do comprehension and reading. We had a microanalysis of how time was used. And it led me to develop a theory of instruction about academic learning time and how it's used. And we still think now, 30 years later, that we have still the best classroom predictor of achievement at the end of the year that anyone can find. If you look at how time is spent, whether kids are engaged in curriculum that's the ones you want. And it's fascinating stuff. And what's interesting is it died. Nobody paid attention to it, and it's gotten buried in time. But it's come back now. So I've been working with the state of Massachusetts, I'm working with the Balls district here in Phoenix. They're all adding time, and they want to know how to use the time. In fact, today I got a phone call from the Washington Post asking me about the use of time. And I keep telling people, we've found time matters, but time's not an empty vessel. It has to be filled with something worthwhile. And just adding time is not going to make a difference. But it was a very important study in its day, died, and I think it's coming back now. And brighter people than me are trying to figure out how to use that scarce resource. If you're studying a business, you look for how they spend money and where they get money, profit centers, cost centers. That's how you study a business. If you look at a classroom, how you spend time is the equivalent of how you spend money. It's the one resource under a teacher's control, and it represents their view of the world. So it's a very important variable. It's a proxy for their philosophy, I think, though not many other people do, but I do.
Or tell us about your work with the late Nate Gage.
Oh, that was just a wonderful relationship. When I went to work for Far West Lab, now WestEd, he was my boss at Stanford, and a man named Walter Borg was my boss at WestEd. They were joint heads of a project they didn't want to work on, so they hired me. And so I moved from my first job at UMass Amherst back to the Bay Area, where I loved it and wanted to work. And Nate Gage asked me if I would work with him on a textbook he'd been trying to write for 10 years or so. And I thought, what a wonderful opportunity. This wonderful guy, I had known him. I had not worked close with him at Stanford, but I had known him, and I knew he was a decent fellow. And we became such good friends. He was a mentor, a brother, an uncle, friend. And we worked together. We started work in 1970. The book came out in 1975, and it was a hit. It was not the best-selling book ever in 25 years, but it always was up one, two, or three, the second or third or fourth place. But it was used at the most prestigious institutions. It was considered the better book in the field, which made us very happy. Though we wish it was used in more places. We could have been happy with more royalties too. But anyway, it was used in nice places. It became the textbook, the leading textbook in Germany, and a whole generation of German scholars were trained with Gage and Berliner. We revised it 6 times, the last in 90-something, and it still sells a couple of thousand copies a year. And it's now going to be revised by Sharon Nichols, who was my postdoc student a few years ago. And she's going to take on the book now and bring it up to date a little, because it's gotten a little rusty. But working with Gage was working with a paragon of integrity, a wonderful academic, and a really decent human being. And one of the nice things that ever happened to me.
Then came your best-selling book, The Manufactured Crisis. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, that's an interesting tale. Gary Fenstermacher, one of my friends, a philosopher of education, was head of AACT, the president one year, and he wanted me to give a talk on expert teachers, which I had been studying at the convention. And I said, no, I want to talk about education in general, because people don't know that it's really kind of good, and they're all saying nasty things. This was shortly after A Nation at Risk had come out. And what made me say that to Gary Fenstermacher was I had been a respondent at an APA convention to a series of papers that were all critical of the schools. And I got up and I said, I think you're all full of baloney. I go out to schools every day. I'm in schools. I watch teachers. They're not bad. They're wonderful. Occasionally lazy, occasionally not prepared, but day in and day out, these are wonderful people doing a really good job. And I left the podium, and Nate Gage was in the audience. And Nate Gage comes up to me and says, David, do you have data for what you said? And I said, well, the data's everywhere, Nate. And he says, if it's everywhere, why didn't you cite it? Good old Nate. And so I said, yeah. That's when I got the phone call, and that's when I thought, I'll get the data, that the schools really are good. So I got the data and gave the speech in February So I worked from September to February on the speech about how good the schools were. I met Jerry Bracey at that time. I learned of the Sandia report at that time. A number of people were beginning to understand that the criticisms of the schools were not accurate. And so I gave this paper, and poor Ursula, my long-suffering wife, I often try out papers the night before I give them on her. And I tried that paper out on her, and she said, "Your career changes tomorrow." It was very prescient. I said, "What do you mean? No. Anyway, I gave the talk, and 500 deans jumped up and cheered. And they made Xerox copies of it, and 10,000 Xerox copies of it went out. And Gene Glass published it in EPA. It was one of the first papers to be published in EPA in a very rough form. But the word got out that, the schools are doing really pretty good. And Bruce Biddle came for dinner. I had known him slightly. He was a friend, a colleague. He was visiting town. We invited him and he and his wife for dinner. And he said, "That was a terrific paper. You got to write a book on this." I said, "I can't write a book on it. I don't know enough. I can't do this." And he says, "But you can write on this." I said, "No, I don't know that." He said, I can help you." Well, at the end of the dinner, we agreed to write the book together. And again, co-authors are so important. I love working with co-authors. And Bruce and I hit a friendship that's wonderful. And he's a wonderful scholar. He knows lots of things I don't know. And we wrote this book together, and it became a bestseller. And then I changed my career because I became a policy person, not that I studied teachers and teaching and teacher education till then. And at that point, I started studying educational policy. And at that point, I became a pain in the butt to politicians and others because they were lying. And I mean, people have been very kind. They use the word integrity. I never think of myself as having integrity. But you shouldn't lie, It's wrong to lie. And when the Reagan administration was lying and politicians were lying, I thought someone should tell them that they're lying. And so I did. And I've been sort of doing that ever since. It's great fun to say, "You lied, you lied." and I wrote the book with Bruce, and we sold 50,000 copies. And for a book with tables and figures, that's a remarkable achievement. In the hierarchy of things, you have to understand, our book came out the same time Colin Powell's book came out, same publisher. They published 700,000 copies of his book and 7,000 copies of ours. So it was a 10-to-1 ratio, no, more than that, 100-to-1 ratio of what they expected the books to sell. His ended up on the remainder list. Ours sold out. So we did good with that. It was nice.
It was more than nice. It was truly inspiring, and I think everyone that's read it would agree. Okay, describe your work on high-stakes testing.
Again, because my research area is really about teachers and teaching, although I had not visited classrooms a lot, I was teaching teachers, the Delta program in my Ed Psych course. I was talking to teachers about, at that time, the Ames test, and I had colleagues here working on some criticisms of it, colleagues on the West Campus. Tom Halladin is here. Meredith Smith was working on some issues with the testing at that time here. And these teachers were telling me stories of testing problems, and I got interested in it, and got a little grant through the Great Lakes Center, which is an NEA affiliate that Alex Molnar got, and we got some money to get you involved. I think we were able to hire you for a year.
Postdoc.
Yeah, and so we got you. And a little after you, I was able to get Sharon Nichols in. And so the money was used very wisely to support brilliant young scholars like you and Sharon, and slowly built up the evidence that high-stakes testing was hurting people, and it was hurting our country. And what looked like a very sensible lever for causing change in the schools turns out to be a very harmful social policy. It hurts students, it corrupts teachers, and with you we did a lot of studies showing that it's not improving test scores, it's driving kids into the GED, dropout rates. You and I were criticized for our research. It's all been backed up and supported now. Linda McNeil and others have found exactly what we said they'd find with the GED and SATs and all of that. So we've been vindicated, but we stirred the pot, and with Sharon Nichols, we stirred the pot again. We wrote the book, Collateral Damage, and told the stories of the corruption in our schools as a function of high-stakes testing. And now we have a Secretary of Education who's continuing the program, and our schools are slowly getting worse. And the people who used to come here to study our schools are going to soon stop, because we're going to look like the schools they've created that they don't like. And it's a very sad commentary. So I'm going to stay with that a little longer. Somebody needs to tell people they're lying.
About one of my personal favorite pieces that you've written is your article in the highly esteemed journal Educational Research, titled Educational Research, the Hardest Science of All. What is that about?
Well, somebody gave me the nicest compliment when the article came out. It was a student of Kronbach's, and she emailed me, Ellen Mandenick, and she emailed me and said, Kronbach lives. And I thought, oh, isn't that sweet? And I realized, in a way, he does. I mean, Kronbach understood that the social sciences have tremendous limits. And this notion that you can run the social sciences the way the physical sciences run, or you can do randomized clinical trials like the drug companies do and get information that's perfectly sensible to use, which they can't either, but they lie. And in education, it's harder. And I just got outraged over the report about educational science that was written by my dear friend Rich Shavelson and others, that they made it sound like educational science really could be like the other sciences. And I think educational is a science, certainly, but it's not a science like other sciences. It's got problems. In the field, they talk of the hard sciences like physics and the soft sciences like psychology and educational research. And I kind of turned that on its head and talked of the easy sciences, physics, chemistry. Those are easy sciences. Your results are likely to hold up in Peru and Canada. The hard sciences are when you get findings that only work in Scottsdale and may not generalize to the other side of Phoenix. That's a hard science. It's no less a science, but it's harder to do. So I contrasted easy and hard science, and the usual way is to talk of hard and soft science. Well, there's nothing soft about educational research. It's really hard work. It's the most intellectually challenging research field you can go into, because you can't control the variables like you want. And physicists have vacuums, you know. You can chart where a leaf falls in a vacuum. Well, classrooms are not vacuums. You have problems that arise, including the role of the researcher. And that's why it's the hardest science of them all. Science, but it's tough science. We have to eke out our knowledge, and we do. We do very well.
Do you have another favorite topic in educational research of which you are most proud?
Well, I think the Handbook of Educational Psychology that I co-edited with Bob Calfee is something I'm proud of, because educational psychology is my home discipline and been very good to me. And people had not brought together what the field was. We had textbooks, but we did not have a sense of what the key areas that make up our field are: individual differences, intelligence, motivation, the social psych of schools. And we put into that handbook the psychology of subject matter, which was very popular in the 1920s and then died out completely. But we kind of helped to bring back, because the psychology of math and the psychology of comparative literature in 10th grade, those are different fields. They have different epistemologies. You have to work with kids differently. And we kind of were proud to bring back the psychology of subject matter, and, which Schulman had educated us on, among others. And so we're very, very proud of that one. That's one I'm proud of.
Great.
Oh,
Another?
yeah. I wrote a book with my wife. It's called Putting Research to Work in Your Schools, in which we took articles. We had I would describe the article in terms that we thought people could understand, and that she would talk about what that means for a principal or a teacher, and the two would be packaged together. We did it as a column for Instructor magazine for many years. We would get fan mail from teachers all over the world, you know, saying, "Thank you, you helped us," you know. And we got a phone call from a teacher in Peru once, and that was fun. But we packaged those for a book, Putting Research to Work in Your Schools, and that book has got us a lot of fan mail and things too. That's nice to be able to try to take research and put it in a form that's usable, because it's one of the big gaps in our field. We have researchers talking to other researchers and teachers talking in the teacher's lounge, and you don't get the two talking together. And I think we help bridge that a little.
That's excellent. Well, your work is truly inspiring, and I think everybody here today and people that will watch this show in the future would agree.